What's the most messed up way your parents joked with you? My mom started telling me about my missing older brother Zach when I was 6 years old. She'd point to the empty bedroom at the end of the hall and say that used to be his room before he disappointed her. She kept one of his old baseball trophies on the mantel as a reminder of what happens to children who don't behave. Zach was my favorite, she'd say while brushing my hair before school. So talented and handsome, but he started talking back and getting bad grades. I had to send him away. I believed every word because I was just a little kid who trusted his mother. She'd shake her head sadly whenever I asked where Zach went. She said the state had special places for children whose parents didn't want them anymore. If I wasn't careful, I'd end up there too, and she'd have to find another boy to be her son. The fear shaped my entire childhood. I got straight A's and never talked back. I did extra chores without being asked and always said please and thank you. Mom reinforced the story constantly. When I got a B+ on a spelling test, she said I was reminding her of Zach. When I forgot to take out the trash, she'd stand by the empty bedroom and pretend to cry. The manipulation worked because I doubled my efforts to be the perfect child every single time. By the time I turned 10, the story had evolved. Now Zach was living on the streets because no foster family wanted a bad kid. She'd point out homeless people when we drove through the city and say one of them might be him. I'd press my face against the car window searching for a boy who looked like me. That's what happens when mothers give up on their children, she'd say. They end up cold and hungry with nobody to love them. I started having nightmares about being abandoned. In my dreams, I'd wake up in a cardboard box while my mom drove by without stopping. The fear followed me everywhere, making me anxious about every small mistake. Teachers praised my behavior, but I was constantly terrified of slipping up. One day I found an old photo album in the basement. I flipped through hoping to find pictures of Zach, but there were none. Every family photo showed my parents with just me. No empty space where another child should be. When I asked Mom about it, she said she destroyed all photos of Zach because they were too painful. Middle school brought new fears because Mom said that's when Zach really started going downhill. Every time I felt normal preteen rebellion bubbling up, I'd remember the empty bedroom and swallow my feelings. My friends were starting to push boundaries while I remained terrified of disappointing my mother. I was walking home from school on a particularly bad day when everything changed. I'd gotten detention for something that wasn't my fault and knew Mom would compare me to Zach again. I was cutting through the park trying to delay the inevitable lecture when I saw them. A man and teenage boy were sitting by a tent near the playground. They had sleeping bags and a shopping cart full of belongings. The boy looked about 16 with messy hair and worn clothes. But it was his face that stopped me cold. He had the same brown eyes and dimpled chin that I saw in the mirror every morning. I stood frozen, staring at what could only be my brother. We had the same nose and jawline and even the same way of tilting our heads. The boy noticed me staring and our eyes met across the grass. Recognition flickered across his face and he slowly stood up. The man beside him grabbed his arm looking worried, but the boy shook him off. He walked toward me with this strange expression like he was seeing a ghost. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. When he got close enough, I could see the tears in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Daniel," I whispered back. He nodded like that confirmed something. "I'm Zach. How old are you?" 12. "She had another one," he said to himself. Then louder, "Is she still telling you about me? About how I was bad and she had to get rid of me?" My whole world was spinning. Zach was real and standing right in front of me. But he was supposed to be older, not just 4 years ahead of me. Mom had always made it sound like he'd been gone for decades, not just since I was a toddler. "She says you were her favorite until you disappointed her," I managed to say. Zach laughed, but it was bitter and sad. "She told me the same thing about a brother named James. Said I had to be perfect or I'd end up like him. I believed it for years until I realized there was no James. Then she had you and the cycle started over." The man who'd been with Zach walked over slowly. Zach introduced him as Tom, a social worker who'd been helping him get off the streets. Tom had found Zach 2 years ago after he aged out of foster care. "She didn't send me away because I was bad," Zach said. "She sent me away because she's sick. She can't love without controlling. When I started thinking for myself at 13, she called CPS and said I was violent, made up whole stories about me threatening her." I felt sick listening to him describe our mother's lies. The empty room, the baseball trophy, all of it was designed to keep me in line through fear. Zach pulled out a worn photo from his pocket and showed it to me. It was him as a little boy with our mom. The same mom who'd convinced me he was her biggest failure. "She'll do it to you too," Zach warned. That's when my mom called. "Where are you, sweetie?" My hand was shaking as I pulled the phone from my pocket, and Zach grabbed my arm hard. "Act normal," he whispered fast. "Don't let her know." I pressed the answer button and tried to make my voice steady. "Hi, Mom. I'm at the park." She asked why I wasn't home yet, and I told her I'd be there soon. "Just walking around a bit." Tom was already digging in his wallet and pulled out a business card. He flipped it over and wrote his cell number on the back with a pen from his pocket. "Take this," he said quiet while I was still talking to Mom. I grabbed it and shoved it in my back pocket while telling Mom I'd be home in 10 minutes. When I hung up, Zach was already talking fast. "Listen, you can't tell her you found me. She'll flip out and make things worse for you. Tom nodded and explained they needed to make a plan. Tomorrow at the school, borrow someone's phone and text me, Zach said. Delete everything right after. We'll figure out when to meet again, but you have to go home now and pretend nothing happened. Tom added that if Mom found out too soon, she might call CPS herself and make up lies about me like she did with Zach. She's good at playing victim, he warned. I started walking away but turned back and Zach called out to keep acting scared of disappointing her for now. It keeps you safe until we figure this out. The walk home felt like forever and my legs were shaking. I kept practicing normal faces in case Mom was watching from the window. When I got to our street, I saw her standing at the front door with her arms crossed. There you are, sweetie, she said in that fake sweet voice she used when she was actually mad. Come inside, I was so worried. The second I walked through the door, she started patting my pockets and looking through my backpack. Just checking you have everything for homework, she said. But I knew now she was looking for evidence of Zach. She found nothing because Tom's card was hidden in my back pocket, and she didn't check there. She kept talking about how dangerous the park was and how I shouldn't go there alone anymore. That night I couldn't eat dinner and Mom asked if I was sick. I said my stomach hurt from running in PE, and she let me go to my room early. I walked past the empty bedroom at the end of the hall and stopped to stare at it. The door was always closed, but I could picture it now, not as a warning about some bad kid who disappointed her, but as a prop in her twisted game. The baseball trophy on the mantle wasn't from Zach's Little League team like she always said. It was probably something she bought at a thrift store to make her story seem more real. Everything was fake, designed to keep me scared and under control. I lay in bed thinking about tomorrow and how I'd text Zach without getting caught. The next day at the school, I waited until lunch and asked my friend Jake if I could borrow his phone to call my dad about picking me up. He handed it over without questions, and I went to the bathroom stall to text the number Tom wrote down. It's Daniel. I'm okay, I typed. Zach texted back immediately saying we could meet for a few minutes after school tomorrow behind the library. Delete this whole conversation and act totally normal at home, he wrote. I deleted everything and gave Jake his phone back. That night, Mom started her lecture about the detention I'd gotten, and it was exactly like Zach warned. She took away my phone privileges for 2 weeks and added new rules about coming straight home after school. You're starting to remind me of your brother, she said while I sat at the kitchen table. First it's detention, then it's skipping class, then it's failing grades. She went on for over an hour about how disappointed she was and how I was heading down the same path as Zach. I nodded and apologized over and over, playing the part of the scared kid she wanted. I'm sorry, Mom. It won't happen again, I said. I'll do better, I promise. She seemed satisfied with my fear and sent me to do homework. Lying in bed later, I started remembering all the times she'd used Zach to scare me. When I was 7 and spilled grape juice on the carpet, she stood over me saying Zach used to spill things too, and look where he ended up. When I was 9 and forgot my math homework in my locker, she made me stand in front of the empty bedroom while she cried about how Zach forgot things all the time. When I was 11 and asked to quit piano lessons, she spent 3 hours telling me Zach quit baseball, and that's when everything went wrong for him. Every single threat was calculated to make me more afraid. The next few days at the school were hard because I kept spacing out in class. My math teacher pulled me aside after I failed a pop quiz and asked if everything was okay. You're usually so focused, she said. Then the counselor, Mr. Reynolds, called me to her office and asked similar questions. Teachers are noticing you seem distracted, she said gently. I almost told her everything right then, but remembered Zach's warning about being careful who to trust and when to speak up. Just tired from studying, I lied. After school, I met Zach behind the library for exactly 10 minutes. He pulled out a folded photocopy from his pocket and showed it to me. It was an old report card with James written at the top in Mom's handwriting, but everything else was typed. She made this to show me when I was your age, he explained. James was the made-up brother before me, and I was the made-up brother for you. The paper looked so real, but knowing it was fake made me feel sick. Tom showed up right as our 10 minutes ended and started pressuring me to tell someone at the school about everything. Kids need multiple adults looking out for them, he said firmly. CPS takes reports more seriously when they come from teachers or counselors, not just angry teenagers or homeless people. I nodded, even though my stomach was twisting into knots at the thought of telling another adult. Tom handed me a pen and had me write Zach's number on my hand since Mom checked my phone regularly. We agreed to meet again in 3 days if I could get away. Same place and time. Walking home felt like walking toward a storm I could see coming but couldn't avoid. Mom was waiting on the porch with her arms crossed and that fake worried expression she wore for the neighbors. She hugged me in front of Mrs. Chen, who was watering her plants next door, then gripped my shoulder hard as we went inside. The lecture lasted 2 hours with her pacing around the living room, listing all the ways I was disappointing her. She brought up Zach 14 times, counting on her fingers how I was following his exact path to failure. I apologized and promised to do better while staring at the baseball trophy on the mantle. That night, after she went to bed, I found an old notebook in my desk drawer and started writing everything down. The time she made me sleep in the hallway when I was 7 because Zach used to slam doors. The way she cried at parent-teacher conferences saying she couldn't lose another son. How she would point at homeless camps and say Zach probably lived in one. I dated each memory as best I could remember, filling 12 pages before my hands started cramping. The next morning at breakfast, she started another story about driving past a man who might have been Zach. She used the exact same words she'd used last month about his dirty clothes and how thin he looked. Even the part about him maybe recognizing our car but being too ashamed to wave was word for word the same. I ate my cereal and nodded while she performed her script, noticing how she paused at the same spots for effect. After school, I tried to slip upstairs, but Mom was waiting in the kitchen with her phone in her hand. Mrs. Porter had called about my detention, and now I was grounded for the weekend with no laptop and no leaving except for school. She took my computer from my room and put it in her closet, while explaining how Zach started with detention too. Friday dragged by with me unable to contact Zach or Tom and Mom, watching my every move at home. Saturday was worse because she made me sit with her while she did errands, keeping me in sight constantly. Sunday night I lay awake planning what to tell someone at the school, running through the words over and over. Monday morning during study hall I asked for a bathroom pass and went to Ms. Reynolds' office instead. She looked up from her computer as I stood in her doorway trying to make myself speak. I sat down and started with the empty bedroom, then the baseball trophy, then finding Zach in the park. The words came out in broken pieces while she took notes without interrupting. I told her about the fake brother named James and how Mom had done this before. I explained the threats and manipulation and how she used fear to control everything I did. Miss Reynolds' face got more serious with each detail, especially when I described Mom's grounding me to keep me from Zach. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with this expression I couldn't read. She explained she had to report this to CPS by law because it was emotional abuse and I was in danger. She said someone would probably contact me within a day or two, and we would meet again tomorrow. She wrote her direct phone number on a sticky note and told me to call if I needed anything before then. Tuesday afternoon, the principal called me to his office, where he told me a caseworker named Ms. I. Krause had been assigned to my case. The intake had happened faster than expected, and she would be contacting me soon. My hands were shaking as I walked back to class thinking about what Mom would do when she found out. Wednesday morning, Mr. Krause called the school, and I talked to her in the counselor's office while Ms. Reynolds sat nearby. She explained how the investigation would work in this calm, professional voice. She would interview me first, then Mom and Zach separately, and probably do a home visit within the week. She asked me lots of questions about specific incidents and dates while typing on her laptop. That evening, Missy Reynolds gave me a copy of a written statement Zach had prepared with Tom's help. Reading his experiences made my chest tight because it was all the same patterns, the same empty room story, the same threats about foster care, the same escalation when he started questioning things. He wrote about standing in front of that bedroom while Mom cried about losing her favorite son. He described the homeless people she pointed out and the fear that followed him everywhere. Seeing it written down made me feel less crazy and less alone for the first time. Friday afternoon, Mrs. Krause came to our house for the first CPS home visit. Mom had somehow found out it was happening and prepared like she was hosting a party. She offered tea and homemade cookies while talking about how concerned she was about my recent behavior. I sat frozen on the couch as she charmed Miss Krause with stories about my good grades and activities. When Mrs. Krause asked me directly if I felt safe at home, Mom's eyes drilled into me from across the room. I mumbled something about everything being fine while my stomach churned with fear and shame. After Ms. Krause left, I waited until Mom was in the shower and grabbed her phone from the counter. I locked myself in the bathroom and called Zach's number with shaking fingers. He answered on the second ring, and I whispered everything about the visit and how I'd frozen up. He told me it was okay, that he'd done the same thing many times when he was my age. Then he explained what Mom had done to him when he was 13, and finally started pushing back. She'd filed false reports claiming he hit her and stole money from her purse. She told CPS he'd threatened to burn the house down and hurt me when I was just a baby. She convinced teachers and social workers that he was violent and dangerous, when really he'd just started asking why there were no photos of James. The manipulation was so complete that people believed her over him every time. The next morning, my English teacher pulled me aside after class and handed me a folder with papers inside. She'd written a detailed report about my detention, saying I was actually defending another kid from getting bullied and shouldn't have been punished at all. She told me she'd already sent copies to the principal and Mr. Reynolds because she wanted it documented properly. Having an adult see the truth and actually do something about it made my chest feel lighter for the first time in days. I thanked her and tucked the folder into my backpack, feeling like maybe adults could help after all. When I got home that afternoon, Mom was waiting by the door with my backpack already in her hands. She dumped everything onto the kitchen table and started going through each pocket and folder like she was looking for drugs or something. Her fingers found Tom's business card that I'd stupidly kept hidden in the small front pocket. She held it up between two fingers and asked in her sweet, concerned voice who this was and why I had his number. My brain scrambled for a lie, and I told her some random guy at the park gave it to me last week, and I forgot it was even there. She studied my face for way too long before setting the card down and telling me to be more careful about taking things from strangers. The next day, Mr. Reynolds called me to her office during lunch, and we worked out a whole safety plan together. She programmed her personal cell number into my phone under Math Tutor, so Mom wouldn't get suspicious if she saw it. We came up with code words I could text her if things got bad at home, like asking about homework meant I needed to stay after school, and mentioning a test meant I needed immediate help. She also gave me names and numbers of other adults at the school who knew about my situation and could help if she wasn't available. Before I left, she made copies of everything I'd written in my journal and locked them in her filing cabinet. I took Zach's photo and my original journal pages to the school the next morning and hid them in my locker behind my gym clothes. Making copies of the most important entries took forever during study hall, but I needed evidence Mom couldn't destroy if she found my hiding spots at home. Miss Reynolds kept one complete set in her locked cabinet, and I hid another set in an old textbook in my locker that nobody would think to check. Wednesday of the second week, Ms. Krause came back to the school and interviewed me alone in the conference room this time. Without Mom watching, I could finally tell her everything about the threats and manipulation and the empty bedroom and the baseball trophy. She typed notes on her laptop while asking really specific questions about dates and exactly what Mom said and when she said it. She wanted to know about patterns and asked if Mom's stories ever changed or contradicted each other. I told her about the timeline problems with Zach's age and how Mom kept adding new details that didn't match up. Miss Krause nodded like she was putting puzzle pieces together and said having specific examples really helped her understand what was happening. That evening, I was doing homework when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Tom calling from Zach's phone to explain how the foster care system actually worked, since Mom's stories were all lies. He told me that when kids age out at 18, they often end up homeless because there's no support system to help them transition to adult life. He wanted me to understand that even if CPS got involved, the system wasn't perfect, and I needed to keep building my support network with trusted adults. He also said Zach wanted me to know he was proud of me for speaking up, even though it was scary. 2 days later, Mom got an official letter from CPS about the investigation, and her reaction was like watching an actress at the Oscars. She cried huge tears while reading it out loud and kept saying she couldn't believe her own son would betray her like this after everything she'd done for me. Then in the next breath, she contradicted herself by saying she knew this would happen because I was turning out just like Zach after all. She spent the whole evening switching between crying about being a victim and yelling about how ungrateful I was. Late that night, I sat in bed with my journal and started comparing all of Mom's stories to actual dates and ages. She'd always said Zach left when I was 2 years old, but she also claimed she called CPS on him when he was 13. If he was 13 when I was 2, that would make him 23 now, but he was only 16. The math didn't work at all, and I realized she'd been making up dates and ages to fit whatever story she was telling at the moment. Everything was starting to unravel, and I could see the pattern of lies more clearly. Meanwhile, Miss Krause met with Zach at Tom's office downtown, where he showed her his old CPS records with all of Mom's false allegations from 3 years ago. She told him that having 2 siblings with matching stories about the same patterns of abuse made the case much stronger. She could see Mom was using the exact same tactics with me that she'd used with Zach. Over the next few days, Mom started her damage control campaign by telling all the neighbors and family friends that I was going through a rebellious phase. She said I was making up stories for attention because I was jealous of other kids at the school or something. The lady next door started giving me these pitying looks whenever she saw me, like she felt bad for my poor mother having to deal with such a difficult child. I could see Mom building her own narrative to discredit anything I might say, and it made me feel trapped all over again. The next day, Missy Reynolds called me to her office during lunch and handed me a thick envelope from CPS. I opened it with shaking hands while she sat beside me. The letter was full of big legal words about voluntary services and family preservation. Mr. Reynolds pointed to different sections and explained what they meant in normal words. CPS wanted Mom to take parenting classes and both of us to go to family therapy. They found enough problems to step in, but not enough to take me away from home. I folded the letter carefully and Missy Reynolds made a copy for her files. That Thursday night, my phone rang around 10, and it was Zach's number on the screen. I answered quietly in case Mom was listening from the hallway. We didn't talk about Mom or CPS or any of the bad stuff. Instead, we talked about the new Spider-Man game and which movies were coming out soon. He told me about a band he liked, and I told him about my science project. For 10 minutes, we were just regular brothers catching up. It felt like something had been missing from my life, and I'd just found it. Mrs. Krause called the school 2 days later, asking for my old medical records. The school nurse pulled out files going back to kindergarten and faxed them downtown. Mrs. Krause called back that afternoon sounding frustrated. She'd found notes from when I was 7 about teachers worrying I seemed anxious. There were 3 appointments Mom had canceled after parent-teacher conferences. My second-grade teacher had written concerns about my fear of making mistakes. None of these red flags had been connected until now. The winter concert came 2 weeks later, and Mom dressed up nice and sat in the front row. When other parents came over, she bragged about my straight A's and perfect attendance. She told them how proud she was of her well-behaved son. I stood on the risers with the other kids singing holiday songs. My body was there, but my mind felt disconnected, like I was watching someone else's life. Mom took pictures and posted them online with captions about her talented boy. After the concert, she talked to my teachers about my college prospects, even though I was only in 7th grade. Everyone thought she was such a devoted mother. A few days later, I worked up the courage to ask Mom about James while we were eating dinner. She was cutting her chicken when I said Zach had mentioned that name. Her knife stopped moving for just a second. Then she looked at me with this confused expression. James? I don't know any James, sweetie. You must have misheard. She went back to eating like nothing happened. But then she started talking about how disappointed she was that I believed strangers. She said real family members trust each other, not random people making up stories. For the next hour, she listed all the things she'd done for me since I was born. She reminded me about every sacrifice and every dollar spent on my education. By the time she finished, I felt guilty for even asking. The following Tuesday, I was doing homework in my room when I heard the doorbell. Mom answered it, and I recognized Miss Krause's voice asking to come in. Mom hadn't been expecting her, and I could hear the fake sweetness in her voice as she invited Mrs. Krause inside. I stayed upstairs but kept my door cracked to listen. Mom was in the middle of one of her lectures about my recent behavior. I heard her using my full name like she always did when she was mad. She was telling Miss Krause how I'd been acting out lately, and maybe I needed to go somewhere for troubled boys. Mrs. Krause's voice stayed calm as she asked Mom to clarify what she meant. Mom kept talking about how hard it was to manage a difficult child. Mrs. Krause wrote everything down and asked if she could speak to me privately. Mom called me downstairs and I could see the anger in her eyes even though she was smiling. Mrs. Krause asked me some questions while Mom hovered nearby. I kept my answers short and didn't make eye contact with either of them. After Mrs. Krause left, Mom went through the mail and found the phone bill. She started checking the numbers and found texts to a number she didn't recognize. She called it from her phone, and when it went to voicemail, she heard Tom's voice. Mom's face turned red and she started screaming. She said I was forbidden from contacting Zach ever again. If I tried to reach him, she'd send me to live with Dad's relatives in another state. She'd always told me they didn't want me, but now she said they'd take me if she asked. She grabbed my phone and deleted Zach's number while I watched. The next morning, I felt sick to my stomach thinking about facing Mom after school. During math class, I texted Ms. Art Reynolds the code word we'd set up. She texted back that I should come to the library after school. I stayed there doing homework while she called Mom to say I was in tutoring. Tom picked me up at 7 when Ms. Art Reynolds said Mom had calmed down enough. He drove me home in silence and walked me to the door. Mom answered with her normal face on, thanking Tom for bringing me home safely. She even offered him coffee, but he politely declined. After he left, she went to her room without saying anything to me. The next week, CPS sent an updated safety plan that Mom had to sign. I had to attend an after-school program 3 days a week now. Miss Reynolds would check in with me twice a week during study hall. Mom couldn't refuse without looking suspicious to the court. She signed the papers but made comments about how inconvenient it was to drive me places. She said other parents didn't have to deal with this kind of interference. Meanwhile, Tom was helping Zach fill out applications for youth housing programs. They spent hours on paperwork and gathering documents Zach needed. 2 weeks later, Zach got a letter saying he'd been approved for a studio apartment. The program would help with rent for 2 years while he got on his feet. It was small and basic, but it would be his own place with a door that locked. Tom took him to see it, and Zach sent me a picture through Tom's phone. It was just one room with a tiny kitchen area, but Zach was smiling bigger than I'd ever seen. This was the first real stability he'd had since Mom kicked him out. Tom said they'd move him in next month when the current tenant left. 2 days later, Zach texted me through Tom's phone saying he had something important to show me. I met them at the library after school where Zach pulled out his old phone that barely worked anymore. He scrolled through files until he found an audio recording from 3 years ago. He pressed play and I heard Mom's voice talking to someone on the phone about him. She was saying Zach had pushed her down the stairs and she was scared for her safety. Her voice was calm and practiced like she was reading from a script. She said he'd threatened to hurt her if she didn't let him do whatever he wanted. She said she found bruises on her arms from where he grabbed her. Everything she was saying was a total lie, but she sounded so believable. The recording went on for 10 minutes with Mom adding more and more fake details about violence that never happened. Zach said he'd started recording her after realizing she was making stuff up because nobody believed him without proof. 3 days after that, Mom called CPS saying I'd pushed her against the kitchen counter and she was afraid I might really hurt her next time. She said it happened Tuesday afternoon around 4 when I got home from the school. But Missy Reynolds had already documented that I was in her office for our regular check-in from 3:30 to 5 that day. When Mr. Krause called the school to verify Mom's claim, she found out I couldn't have done what Mom said. Mr. Krause came to the school the next morning looking more serious than I'd ever seen her. She sat me down in the counselor's office and explained that Mom's false report changed everything. She said lying to CPS about abuse was a crime and showed Mom wasn't cooperating honestly. She was filing paperwork asking for court oversight because voluntary services weren't working. She explained this meant a judge would look at everything and make decisions that Mom would have to follow. The court would decide about therapy and visits, and Mom couldn't just ignore it like she was doing now. 2 weeks later, we had to go to family court for the intake hearing. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood panels and fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Mom wore her nicest dress and kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, even though she wasn't actually crying. The judge asked me to come up to a microphone and tell him if I felt safe at home. My voice shook as I said sometimes I felt scared when Mom got really mad. Mom made this wounded gasping sound behind me like I'd stabbed her. The judge asked more questions about what made me scared, and I told him about the threats to send me away. After 20 minutes of questions, the judge said he was ordering psychological evaluations for both Mom and me. He also ordered temporary supervision requirements, including mandatory therapy and supervised visits between Zach and me. Mom had to agree to everything because the other option was the judge might remove me from her custody completely. She nodded and said yes through clenched teeth while glaring at me when the judge wasn't looking. The court orders said I had to see a therapist named Mr. Porter twice a week starting immediately. Mom had to attend parenting classes every Saturday for 3 months. Zach and I could have supervised visits once a week with Tom present. Mom also had to let Mrs. Krause do home visits without advance notice. My first appointment with Mr. Porter was the next Monday after school. His office was in a regular office building with gray carpet and motivational posters on the walls. He was younger than I expected, with glasses and a beard. He didn't push me to talk right away, but explained the rules about what he could and couldn't tell other people. He said unless I was hurting myself or someone was hurting me, our conversations would stay private. He let me ask questions about him first, which helped me relax a little bit. I spent most of that first session testing if he'd judge me or take Mom's side. When I mentioned being scared of her, he just nodded and asked what that felt like in my body. He didn't say I was wrong or ungrateful like other adults had. By the end of the hour, I was starting to think maybe I could actually talk to him. At home, Mom was like 2 different people depending on who might be watching. When Mrs. Krause did surprise visits or when we had to go somewhere public, Mom was the perfect concerned mother following every court requirement. But when we were alone, she'd make little comments about how I'd ruined everything. She'd say things like, "Wasn't it nice when we were a happy family before I decided to believe strangers?" I learned to give boring responses that didn't feed her need for drama. When she'd try to start something, I'd just say okay or I don't know and go to my room. She hated it but couldn't complain to anyone without admitting she was breaking the rules about emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, Zach finally got to move into his transitional housing unit on the 1st of the month. Tom drove him there with 2 garbage bags of clothes and a box of personal stuff he'd kept in storage. The studio was tiny with just one main room, a bathroom and a corner with a hot plate and mini fridge they called a kitchen. But Zach had the biggest smile as he put his key in the lock for the first time. Tom helped him get basic furniture from donation centers, including a twin bed, a small table, and 2 folding chairs. For the first time in 3 years, Zach had an actual address and a door that locked, and a place that was just his. At the school, my grades started slipping because I couldn't focus on homework when my whole life was falling apart. My straight A's turned into mostly B's with a C in science. I told Mr. Reynolds during our check-in, and she said it was completely normal when your world was turned upside down. She helped me talk to my teachers about what was happening without giving too many details. Most of them were more understanding than I expected. My science teacher said she'd give me extra time on the next test, and my English teacher let me turn in late assignments without penalty. The school counselor worked with my teachers to create a modified academic plan that gave me official accommodations. I could take breaks during class if I felt overwhelmed and had extra time on all tests and quizzes. I could also eat lunch in Mr. Reynolds' office instead of the cafeteria when I needed quiet space. The pressure to be perfect that I'd carried my whole life started to ease just a little bit. Mom started asking weird questions after my second therapy session with Mr. Porter. She'd wait in the car and then drill me about what we talked about all the way home. When I gave vague answers, she'd get this fake concerned look and say she just wanted to help. The next week, she tried calling Mr. Porter's office, pretending she needed to reschedule my appointment. I heard her on the phone asking the receptionist about what kinds of things kids usually talked about in therapy. She hung up looking frustrated when they wouldn't tell her anything. At my third session, Mr. Porter mentioned Mom had called him directly 3 times that week. He said she wanted to know if I was saying bad things about her. He told her that therapy was confidential, and he couldn't share our conversations even with parents. Mom tried different tactics, like showing up early to pick me up and catching him in the hallway. She'd put on her sweet voice and say she was just worried about me. Mr. Porter would smile politely and repeat the same thing about boundaries and confidentiality every single time. After 2 weeks of this, she finally gave up trying to manipulate him. One afternoon when Mom was at her parenting class, I went looking for tape in her desk drawer. I found a folder stuffed in the back with old mail she'd never thrown away. There was an official letter from Family Services dated 4 years ago when Zach would have been 11. The letter talked about an investigation into concerns about emotional abuse and isolation of a minor child. It said they'd received multiple reports from teachers and neighbors about troubling behavior they'd witnessed. The investigation was closed due to insufficient evidence, but they recommended family counseling that Mom obviously never did. My hands were shaking as I took pictures of every page with my phone. I found 2 more letters from different years with similar language about investigations that went nowhere. Each one matched up perfectly with times Zach said things got really bad at home. I printed the photos at the school the next day and gave them to Miss and Kraus during our weekly meeting. She read through them slowly with her eyebrows getting higher with each page. She said this was exactly the kind of pattern documentation that helped build stronger cases. We sat there going through my journal entries and matching them up with the dates in the letters. Miss Kraus made copies of everything and added them to my official file that was getting thicker every week. She said having evidence from multiple time periods showing the same behavior was really important. We worked together organizing everything chronologically, so anyone reading it could see the clear pattern of abuse. The facilitated meeting happened on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room at the CPS office. Mom wore her nicest outfit and brought a notebook like she was taking this seriously. Mrs. Kraus sat at the head of the table with Mr. Porter on one side and Mom and me on the other. Mrs. Kraus went through a list of ground rules for us living together while the court case continued. Mom had to respect my therapy privacy and stop trying to get information from Mr. Porter. She also had to allow supervised visits with Zach and couldn't punish me for participating in them. Mom nodded and agreed to everything because she didn't have a choice with everyone watching. Mrs. Kraus made her sign papers saying she understood the rules and what would happen if she broke them. My first visit with Zach was scheduled for Saturday at the park near his apartment. Tom picked me up and drove me there while Mom had to stay home. Zach was already shooting baskets at the court when we arrived. He passed me the ball and we just played for 20 minutes without talking about heavy stuff. We talked about video games and movies and what music we liked. He showed me some tricks for making free throws, and we had a contest to see who could make the most. Tom sat on a bench nearby reading a book but keeping an eye on us. After basketball, we got sodas from the vending machine and sat at a picnic table. Zach told me about his job at the grocery store and how he was saving up for a car. I told him about my science project and how I was thinking about joining the chess club. We were just two brothers hanging out like we'd been doing it our whole lives. When Tom said our time was up, we exchanged phone numbers, and Zach said we'd text during the week. Life started falling into a new pattern over the next few weeks. I had therapy with Mr. Porter on Mondays and Thursdays after school. Mr. Reynolds checked in with me every Wednesday during lunch to see how I was doing. I went to after-school tutoring on Tuesdays and Fridays, even though my grades were fine now. Saturday mornings were for visits with Zach and Tom at different parks around town. Mom couldn't do anything without someone noticing, so she mostly left me alone at home. The constant fear I'd lived with for years was slowly being replaced by something that felt like normal teenage life. During one therapy session, I realized something important about myself. I wasn't the perfect robot child Mom had tried to create through fear and manipulation. But I also wasn't the disappointment she always threatened I'd become if I made mistakes. I was just Daniel, a regular kid who liked basketball and science and hanging out with his brother. The mean voice in my head that criticized everything I did was getting quieter each day. I kept Zach's photo in the front pocket of my school binder now. Every time I opened it to get homework or notes, I'd see him smiling back at me. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, and never really had been even when I didn't know he existed. Mom still controlled when I ate dinner and what time I went to bed. But she couldn't control my thoughts or my future or the relationships I was building with people who actually cared about me. In 6 years, I'd turn 18 and be free to make my own choices, just like Zach was doing now. All right, that's it for now. Your comments and support literally fuel everything I do here. Subscribe for more stories that hopefully brighten your day.